doing it. I've always used the echo recording system before, and then Boise State went to Camtasia, so this is a trial to see if I do it right. But if it works out, which it said on the screen that it did, I'll be able to post this on Blackboard. So then if you have to miss class or if you didn't get something, you can always go on Blackboard and fast forward to where you need in the class. So I think it's a good thing to have. So I'll talk first about the books. Well, no, I'll talk first about the syllabus. That's what we should start with. And then, of course, these are the books. So we will be in classroom 8. In fact, I'm going to change that right now so I don't get it wrong again. So we'll be in room 8 on Thursday. Apparently Camtasia is only in this room. But I've always been in this room before, so this is new to me. So room 8 on Thursday. This, of course, is Tuesday, Thursday. You'll see later there will be one Tuesday we won't have class, but I'll give you lots of warning for that. And then I've listed you, and then you see my email, carolschroeder@boisestate.edu. When you're going to email me, the other email also pops up, carolschroeder@u.boisestate, like the student emails, because I've taken several classes at Boise State. But that's not the one that I use, and so if you, but that pops up first on the list, and then my correct one after that. And I asked him, I said, can't you just take away that @u? And then no. So what I do is everything forwards from there to the correct one. But I like to remind students to do the correct one, because sometimes it will take quite a while to get forward. So the vagaries of email I don't understand. So office hours before or after class, just let me know. I can come out early or stay late. And I assume it's going to be the same in room 8, but in room 6 we've never had class before 6 o'clock. So we have time after class. We finish at 5:20. And we have quite a while before the next class comes in. So if you need to talk to me, we can talk either before class or after. Required texts, there are 5 of them. It looks daunting, but actually they're really, the 3 on Japan are pretty quick reads. Japan and its world, you see it's very slim. And mainly the Japanese history, the early Japanese history, I will talk about in lecture. This just starts on the more modern part of Japan. But I like this text. I took a seminar at USC in East Los Angeles. It was kind of a scary neighborhood, but good seminar. But he used this text, and I really enjoyed it, so then I've just used it ever since. I used to have a thicker one. And when we get to China, it's thick and it's dense. This one is, I went to a really pretty, this is, even though there won't be a lot of pages of reading, this will take you a whole lot longer than more pages in one that's small. So this we'll finish with fairly soon, and we'll get to the schedule in a minute. And then Manchurian Legacy, I really like this book. It's written by Kazuko Kuramoto, and for something like 5 or 6 years, I've driven to Ontario and brought her over to speak to the classes. But she's now in a rest home in Seattle, so she no longer is available to come speak to the classes. But I still email her, and I still let her know I'm using her book. I really like this, Memoirs of a Japanese Colonist, because you look at what Japan did during World War II, it was horrible. There's just no excuse for the actions of the Japanese. But they hurt their own people. The militarists who were so vicious really ended up hurting their own people a great deal also. And when we start talking about the death figures, not only but all the bombing that we did and the atomic bombs, but all of the death figures in the war and starvation and terrible conditions. And her family was in Manchuria. And when you read this, you'll see that they were colonists, and they really felt like they were there for the good of Manchuria. Well, Japan was in Manchuria fertilizing the area and like they were doing a good thing. And then afterwards, she's looked back on it and kind of wondered. But it's a miracle that her whole family survived it. At the end of World War II, they had the communists coming in from Russia. They had the native Manchurians and the native Chinese rising up trying to kill them. It was scary. It's just absolutely amazing. They were killed. But part of it is that her father actually helped the Chinese and the Manchurians. And so they warned them. They said, run, when the mobs were coming. And it was in Chinese. Somebody in Chinese said, run. And if that hadn't happened, probably the whole family would have been slaughtered in the home. So it's really an exciting story. And then she married two different Americans. So then she came to the U.S. So she married a GI. Well, he isn't a GI. He worked for the Army in Japan. And then she married a native Japanese, too, after he died. Her first husband died. She married an Issei that grew up in the U.S. So anyway, fascinating story. And I think you'll enjoy it. Again, it's an easy read. The second one that you'll actually be reading is the autobiography of Yukichi Fukuzawa. And again, I'm very fond of this book. It's his own words, and it's really, I think it's endearing. And he is the man that is considered responsible, really, for a lot of the modernizing attitudes in Japan. After the Meiji Restoration in 1868 and before, Fukuzawa was saying we need to westernize, we need to modernize. He got a little far right before his death right around 1900. And then he said we've got to distance ourselves from Asia and got kind of negative toward China and toward Korea because China and Korea were resisting modernization. They didn't want to. The leaders didn't want to. And he said we've got to separate ourselves from the rest of Asia because we are modernizing and westernizing. But they took the ugly part of the West as in setting up colonies and attacking because the West was doing that. 9 out of the 10 Southeast Asian countries were colonized by the West, and this really annoyed Japan. Japan had the idea if anybody should have colonies in Asia, it should be Japan. It shouldn't be America and the Philippines, it shouldn't be Great Britain and Burma, it shouldn't be France and Vietnam, and it goes on and on. All except Thailand of Southeast Asia were colonized by the West, and sometimes colonized very brutally. The Dutch in Indonesia were extremely brutal. They just wouldn't put up with any uprisings, and there were a lot of uprisings. So, and at first, when Japan, during World War II, when it invaded a lot of the Southeast Asian countries, Japan was actually welcomed as a liberator. You know, get the West out of here. But then they found out that Japan was meaner than the West had been, so they didn't want them around anymore. But really, as we know, nobody wants to be colonized. They want to have their own countries. As I mentioned before, the Cambridge Illustrated History will be our book on China. And it will be dense reading, but it really has a lot of good graphics that I like too. So that takes up some of the pages. But it won't be as quick a read as these three are. And then this is a new one, White Tiger. I had read it quite a while ago, but I hadn't ever used it in class. I've usually used Peter Hessler's books, and then I've also used Wild Swans before. But I'm giving White Tiger a try this time, and I'll see what you think about it. But it's, again, it's an autobiography, and it's a man who was born, let's see, I've got the date here, born in 1915 in China. And so he lived through the Qing dynasty ended in 1911. And so the last dynasty was over in China, but he lived through warlord China, he lived through the nationalists, he lived through the communists. I mean, it's just, I think his story is just amazing. He was imprisoned for 7 years by the communists, and his wife was imprisoned too, and all 3 of his children were sent down to the countryside, and his son ended up committing suicide. So he has some sad parts of his life, and yet he just has a wonderful attitude. I think he really would have liked Mrs. Kuramoto. Those two, I'm sure that's part of the appeal of this, is the good attitude in a pretty bad situation a lot of the time. So I think you'll like this one too. This will be an easy read. So back to the syllabus. What we'll do, you see on page 1, and then just stop me anytime if you have any questions. Page 1, I've listed the required texts. This class is a BSU Foundations Program class, and as I understand what that means is if you needed to transfer credits to another school, say you want to go to another school, anything that's Foundations Program, and if they have Foundations Program, they accept the credits. So you don't get hassled like you do sometimes transferring from school to school. So it's a big deal. In the history department, I don't know about the rest of the classes, but in the history department, our history of Western civilization is a Foundations Program, and our history of Eastern civilizations, our U.S. history isn't, is kind of odd. So students need to have the Foundations Program, and I think are they separate credits? Do any of you know? I'm not sure about that, but they will often go to either Eastern Civ or Western Civ, so it sort of hurt U.S. history in the attendance, is what I've been told. So as you get inside, now we're on page 2. I just some verbiage. We'll start with Japan. We'll talk totally about Japan until half of the semester, and then we'll go on to China and just talk about China. One semester I tried using an approach of talking about both countries with a thematic focus, but it was really hard. The students got the countries mixed up, and I don't know if it's that I didn't do it well, or if it's just a lot of material and it was just hard to keep track. Now, was this China or Japan that was doing this at this time? And so I scrapped that, and now we talk about Japan first and then China. I'll throw quite a bit of Korea in. I teach in Korea in the summers at Chungbuk National University in Jeonju, South Korea. And I'll talk more about that later. But I really like Korea, so I'll throw some Korea in too. Just that's part of my personal bias. So you see the grading kind of in the middle of the page. We'll have quizzes every week. No quiz this week, no quiz next week. But then on Tuesday, September 10th, we will have our first reading quiz. And the way I work the quizzes is there are 10 questions, and then there's one extra credit question. And the questions have multiple answers. I always phrase the questions, what is one of the things you read about, da da da. And so if you've read the book and you just remember a little pinch of something, I'm not looking for absolute perfection. I don't care about spelling or any of that. If I can tell you read the book. And what I'll do every day is I'll give you a quiz hint. And this is the quiz hint for our first quiz, which will be on September 10th. And we will be in this book on Japan. And so every day you'll have a quiz hint, every class. And so this one, what was one of the 5 important lessons Sugita learned from his translator work? Now that's something, reading the book, you wouldn't necessarily remember that, but when I give you the question, then that's something you can look up and just keep in mind. And it's also one more reason to either go to class or to access the class, assuming Camtasia is going to work and I can get it posted on Blackboard. But since we don't have a quiz until the 3rd week, you're going to have 4 quiz hints. So you'll have 4 of the 10 questions that are going to be on it. Another thing that I do on the quizzes is the first 2 questions are about something that we talked about in class. So you can see the focus don't have to be ready to write on 10 questions because we'll just do the last class period. I've always scheduled our final exam in here during the next week, which is when you're on campus, when you have to take the final exams. And a year ago when I taught here, I've just been teaching in the fall here, Larry said, you know, what we do at Gowan is we just schedule the final exam on the last day of class. So at least that'll get this one over with, and then other classes you're taking, final exams will be on during the next week. So that'll be good. But anyway, as we're going through, you can make some notes. You can sort of be thinking about these final exam questions as we're going. And you'll have your choice from 2 of them to write on one. And it's totally random. I don't rig it or anything, so you don't need to try to outthink me. One semester, I had a question about the rape of Nanjing, which was just bad thinking on my part. But it's such a big part of the abuses of Japan when it did invade China and when it did just wreak terrible havoc on the city of Nanjing. Well, you know, the final exam week is really close to Christmas. That's one of the 2 questions that came up on the ping pong balls. I was reading, the terrible atrocities, and I thought, I'm not ever doing that question again. So there's nothing in here about the rape of Nanjing. I tried to make them big, kind of all-encompassing questions. And at your leisure, you can sit down and read them and take a look at them. Okay, so that all makes sense so far? Okay. And then these active learning exercises, we'll do them every day. And I don't necessarily look at your answers, and I'll have you work together again each time. And I'm not concerned about correct answers. I'm just concerned about your name on the piece of paper. And so I'll go through and you'll see a point for that each time that you've been in class and that you've completed it. So this is one reason not to skip class if you can not skip it. The other side, of course, if you're terribly sick, it's not worth 1 point to come to class sick and expose people. And hopefully, if Camtasia works, you'll be able to access the class on Blackboard anyway. Okay, so now the schedule. This is week 1, Tuesday and Thursday. Review syllabus and course objectives. No reading assignment. So if you don't have the books yet, obviously you've got some time. This will be our first book, Japan and Its World. Right now, I don't have a copy of this at the Boise State Library. If any of you have trouble getting this in the next 2 weeks, if you're struggling, email me or talk to me, and I'll put a copy on reserve. And then you see the extra credit. The pages you'll be reading for the main part, for the 20 questions, are pages 7 through 39, and then the extra credit is the preface. And so that's just some extra reading if you want to have those 2 extra points. And that'll be the very bottom question on the quiz. Okay, so that's the first quiz. Quiz number 2 is still Jansen. But then we also start Fukuzawa on the second week. And so that's this one. Now, how many of you, do you have your books yet? Or are you, and so they've got them, I usually go down to the Voice Escape bookstore, but I haven't. They've got the books in the bookstore. Or did you just go online? It's usually a little cheaper to go online and buy them. But, so the second quiz will have some Fukuzawa and then some Jansen also. And then the third quiz will be all Fukuzawa. And it looks like quite a few pages, but as you look at the book, he really doesn't fill the pages, and it's really a pretty quick read. But you can see we're getting into more and more reading as we're edging along, too. And then week 7, week 6, your fourth quiz. And then on week 8, we won't have class on Tuesday, October 15th. So, and I'll remind you of this as we're getting closer to it too. But on that week only, we'll have the quiz on Thursday. So I won't be here Tuesday, but I'll be here Thursday, and we'll have class as normal on Thursday. That's also quiz number 6. That's also the cutoff. And so what I'll do is by total points of your quizzes, and I've got the total points in back here somewhere. Yeah, total points on your reading quizzes, and this is based on 6 quizzes. So as you're going along, you can see where you are and how many more points you need to get to edge your grade up. But it'll be based on the 6 quizzes, and so you'll be total points, and so you'll have a grade for the first half. And then when we start on China, we'll start over. You'll have new totals starting, and then you'll have a grade for the second half. So you'll have a grade on Japan and a grade on China, and they're equal. I don't weight one more than the other. That's just the way I set it up. I find if somebody's really struggling and having a hard time, often by having a fresh start, it makes it's just, you put aside those F's that you had the first time with missing quizzes and just focus on the second. And I've had some really good turnarounds in the second half of the semester. I don't like discouragement when you're just slogging along and you just can't move beyond having missed some quizzes or really flubbed up on some of the quizzes. So that's the rationale on having the second half of the grading. Okay, so then this will all be on China. You can see starting with week 9, we start on the Cambridge Illustrated History of China. And then we'll also get some White Tiger in there too. And so it'll be White Tiger and Hebrew. And then you can see of course, just normal Thanksgiving break, the week of November 25th and 30. No Voice Escape classes all week. So you have a week off over Thanksgiving. This is 2013 is the year of the snake. I really like the Chinese calendar. It's kind of different than the Western calendar, of course. And I had to look this up, and I never quite know when Chinese New Year will fall. But it starts with the new moon on the first day of the new year and ends on the full moon 15 days later. Both of my sons teach in Asia. My younger son teaches in Taiwan, in Taipei, and then my older son teaches in Phuket, Thailand. And they both get Chinese New Year off. And so I'll email them and I'll say, when is Chinese New Year this year? Because I often try to figure out if they can come home or if, and they'll say, we don't know, we can't figure it out. So I think you about have to grow up there to keep in mind when it is. But it's a combination of lunar and solar movements is the genesis of it. There's kind of a fun story about a Chinese legend, and there are all sorts of Chinese legends. But this Chinese legend is one I like, so I always have to repeat this one. The Buddha invited all the animals of the kingdom to come before him on Chinese New Year, but 13 arrived, and there were only going to be 12 years. And this is in 12-year cycles, and then it starts over again. And so they all, the ones that arrived, the rat, the ox, the tiger, the rabbit, the dragon, the snake, the horse, the ram, the monkey, the rooster, the dog, and the boar. And so they each were going to get a year named after them, but there was also a cat that arrived. And so the Buddha, and you know, this is just legend, but it's kind of fun. And so the Buddha said, okay, the 12 that win the race will get to have the 12 years of the Chinese New Year named after them, and then it'll start over like it does. And so the rat and the cat got in a fight when they were trying to cross a rapid river. The cat fell to last place, so there's no year of the cat. And so because he lost the race, but the cat is the natural enemy of the rat forever and ever because of this. Well, that's a pretty good reason to be a natural enemy. Why the cat would hate the rat. My older son is Year of the Snake, and he doesn't like that. But really, the snakes are quite attractive in the Chinese art. I love Chinese art. I just think it's so great. This is called a paper cut. This red one, and the Chinese used to do paper cuts with little tiny scissors, and I've seen them. They are so tiny. But now, of course, they've got big machines that go and just cut them. And then they hang the paper cuts. They put them in the windows. Traditional Chinese art during Lunar New Year, the families decorate their homes by displaying these red paper cutouts on the windows. So that's kind of fun too. And then, of course, each year, you've all eaten in Chinese restaurants and read the placemats. This is where you usually see. But ancient Chinese wisdom says a snake in the house is a good omen because it means your family will not starve. So if you were born Year of the Snake, you're good at business, you're willing to sacrifice your possessions in order to pay for your family's food, you measure the value on material wealth. The snake is keen and cunning and quite intelligent and wise. And so the snake years are the 6th year of the cycle. It was the year of the dragon last year, and of course, every 12 years it'll be the year of the snake. And the snakes are really quite auspicious in China. They're not, you think of Adam and Eve and you think of the Western tradition, the snake's sort of evil, but it really isn't. It's sort of like the dragon is auspicious and good in China. And you look at the stories of the dragon in the West, and it's almost always somebody with a sword trying to slew the dragon. And yet in China, the dragons are good. They're auspicious. So it's a very different mindset in the East and West toward both snakes and dragons. This is just one of the, I found this online. I thought it was kind of fun. If only humans could shed their past the way a snake wriggles out of its own skin. So, happy 2013, Year of the Snake. So may treasure and good fortune come your way. But it looks like to me the snake's eating the frog, and I'm not like the snake, or maybe he's letting the frog escape. Maybe we look at it that way. So anyway, year of the snake. Whoops. Mark Durkin spoke to the City Club, and this was, I'm trying to remember, this was, it was after Steve Appleton died. You remember that Steve Appleton crashed his plane in February of 2012, and he had just been such a dynamic leader of Micron from early on. It was so sad, and so this was a number of months after he crashed. It was either right after the beginning of the year or right before when Mark Durkin spoke to City Club. But I thought it was really fascinating what he had to say. He said that he was going to retire at the end of August, but then when Appleton crashed his plane in February of 2012, he didn't get to retire at the end of August. But everything I've read, he's done a really good job at Micron. What he said is 20 years ago, 90% of the silicon that Micron used went into personal computers. That was the big thing. Well, now he said only 10% of what Micron manufactures goes into personal computers. And so he said that Micron, just as a business plan, is moving from silicon to systems. So they're moving up the value chain. And so now they're doing DRAM. And after purchasing Elpida, which was in the negotiation stages at the beginning of the year, of this year when he spoke to us, or at the very end of last year, I'm not sure which, since purchased Elpida, which is Japanese, Micron's now the second largest DRAM maker in the world. But he said Micron used to receive silicon base awards, and now it receives system level process awards. And so it's making a higher profit and a more complicated product than it used to make. He said they buy silicon from all over the world, and he said they don't export jobs. They tend to acquire companies, so they're taking over jobs, not exporting. And yet probably you read when once Micron acquired Elpida, we're going to have 1,500 layoffs in Boise. So it sounds like there are perhaps some duplicative jobs between the two companies. And somebody, and this was one of the City Club people that I don't know if they're right, somebody surmised that Micron promised for 2 years not to fire anybody at Elpida. But I don't know if that, he didn't say that, but that's what somebody else said. But anyway, but the jobs at Micron, gosh, they go up and down, they always have. But you look at Micron's product sales, 68% in Asia. And so that's why it really likes to acquire businesses in Asia. He said competitors like Samsung and Apple are also purchasers of their product. Samsung's the largest competitor, and yet Samsung also buys from Micron. So it's kind of a fascinating situation. He said that feature phones, which are not smartphones, I had not heard that terminology, feature phones, but feature phones have 40% Micron products in them. Smartphones have 20% Micron products in them, and then tablets, 10% components are Micron. But the personal computers are down 15%, have Micron products. So you look, it used to be 90%. So you can see it's a company that really has to shift very much with the market. But it's nice to have it in Boise. Any of you ever worked at Micron or have family or friends that work there? I have some friends that don't work there anymore. So it's not a guaranteed job at all. It's very, it fluctuates a lot, but it apparently pays well. One of the things too that, how's our time going? Okay, we'll just go till 5:20 and then we'll stop. This was a New York Times article, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. fascinating because you see the contradictions in China. This was the title of it. And this was, at the time of this article, which was a few years ago now, this was the richest man in China. And yet, they started just very, very poor. This Liu family lived in southwest China in Sichuan province, and I'll show you a map of where that is in a minute. And they were so short on food in the 1950s, they sent one of their youngest sons to be raised by another family. But these four Liu brothers turned a small quail breeding farm into China's largest private company. And so it's really, they've gone from extreme poverty of having to almost farm out a son to being the richest in China. But you've got the issue in China too. The average factory worker makes less than $50 a week. And you've got the issue in China of 221 million migrants from rural to urban. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So these are issues that China has. And of course, I said we're going to talk about Japan, and we will, but I always like to start with China, just some thoughts about China. You've all heard of Deng Xiaoping, and he came up with the idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics, the idea of allowing in some what we would call capitalism into China, but they don't call it capitalism, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. And he was de facto leader of China in 1978 until the 1990s. And he said, we need more trade with the outside world, we need some market-oriented reforms. He set up special economic zones in China, and it really has helped the living style, but you still have a big gap in wages, which is hard. This is where Sichuan province is, so kind of right in the center of China. And Sichuan province, too, is also contiguous to Tibet, which is right here. I'll talk a little bit about Sichuan province. I probably won't get to it until tomorrow. The Boise State Study Abroad program has a wonderful opportunity to study in Chengdu in Sichuan province. I did that one summer. I think it was a 5-week program. But when you're here in Chengdu, in Sichuan province, you can go to Tibet for not much money, assuming the Chinese are allowing Westerners into Tibet, because sometimes they don't if there's unrest. But it's, I'll talk about that study abroad program later. It's really a good thing to do. You pay your regular Boise State tuition, but it's a great opportunity, and you can study all over the world. You know, it's in other parts than China too. There's also one in Shanghai, a study abroad. I haven't seen that one, but I'm familiar with the one in Chengdu. This is a book by Leslie Chang, Factory Girls, and it really talks about just what it's like when you are a factory girl, when you're working in the factory. It used to be virtually all of the migrants in China that went from the farms to the cities were men. Now it's almost all women, and these factories are just full of women not making much, but they're making more than they were down on the farm. Her family actually was into this too, so it's a very personal account. And the factory girls, as you read her book, they're not all that loyal to where they're working because they're usually bad jobs, and they often will lock the dormitories at night so they don't leave. And they sort of jump from job to job when they can make a little more money. And so they have quite a bit of power just by going to another factory if they don't feel like they're treated well. And some of them move up, not as much as you would like. This is Peter Hessler, and I'll show you a couple of his books. He's really good, and he's married to Leslie Chang, and he has a Boise connection. His cousin lives here. But he writes about 40 cent an hour labor building $500,000 homes. And it's, again, it's just that same idea of the disparity in income of the really rich and the really not rich. And we complain about it in the too, but China's worse. Also, the rural to urban, you don't qualify for an urban hukao, the residency permit, and this affects education. If your children, if you are from, say, Sichuan province and you move to Shanghai for a good job or a better job than you could get in the province, your children can't get free education. You can send them to the pay schools, but usually you don't make enough money to be able to afford to send them to a school that you have to pay for. If you're born in Shanghai and you have a Shanghai hukao, then you just go to the free public education. You've got some health benefits that if you're born there. And China knows that this is an issue, but in a way they need the labor in the big cities, in the Guangzhous and the Shanghais and the Beijings, but they don't really want 100 million more people crowding into the large cities. And if they made this hukao a little more easy to get for the migrants, they would have more. So they're really sort of struggling with this. But right now it isn't fair. Even say you were from Sichuan province and your family, your family went to Beijing. You were born in Beijing. You still have that rural hukao. So it's sort of almost ensuring an underclass in the cities if you're migrants. And it's analogous to our undocumented aliens in the U.S. You know, they're sort of in the shadows and they can't really get the full benefits. And it's hard. It's just it's a social problem that's going on. This is my favorite Peter Hessel book, Oracle Bones. It's really good. I've used it a couple of semesters. And so he really writes about, I think he writes very well about China. He's also, Rivertown is my least favorite, but Shelton Woods has used Rivertown in his History of Eastern Civilization. I really like country driving. I used that for a couple of semesters. But this semester I'm trying out White Tiger, so I'm not doing a HIST book. He has a new one that I haven't read yet called Strange Stones. And apparently he compares China with, I think it's either Wyoming or Colorado. And they say he goes back and forth, but I haven't read it yet. Anyway, good author.